Hello, it's Dee here, and a very warm welcome to another edition of People and Politics. You've no idea how much I enjoy making these shows and talking to the politicians and writers and commentators who give up their time to do this with me. I'm really grateful to them all. I'd be very grateful for you if you subscribe to the show, because if I got more subscribers, if you just help me get more guests, and that'd be a big help indeed. I'm very grateful for today's guest, Iain Dale. Iain and I met earlier this year at the Conservative Party conference, where I was lucky enough to be invited onto his show well, I suppose to talk about my show. And so I'm very grateful that Iain's coming on today. I'm really looking forward to hearing his story and his thoughts on some of the stories, the news story of today, which of course the big story of this week is the re-election of President Trump. So without further ado, here we go with People and Politics. Okay, Iain, thank you very much for doing this, and thanks for coming on the show.
Not at all. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. And of course, the last time we met was at the the Conservative Party conference, which is a phrase that I never thought I would utter. But I was at the Conservative Party conference, and it was such good fun. I had such a great time and coming on your show and stuff.
Well, you looked as if you were having a good time anyway. So,
It, it was great. I had such a blast. And my parents, if my parents, bless them, knew that I'd been there, I'd be like extradited for the family. I really would, But it was great. It was a really busy couple of days, and I met so many people. And of course, I was lucky enough to spend the morning in the company of the lovely Penny Morden. She was so kind to me, and she introduced me to loads and loads of people. It was great, really good.
yeah,
Uh,
well, Penny is a great woman. I'm just so sad she's no longer in Parliament.
well, she's no longer in Parliament at the moment, but I don't know about you. I have every expectation that she'll return at some point in the future.
Well, I hope she does. The trouble is, though, when MPs lose their seats and then they come back a few years later, they're often never the same. They haven't quite got that same authority that they had. I think of when Michael Portillo lost his seat in '97 and then came back in a by-election. And it was almost as if he was a different person. And of course, you lose contact with. I mean, you don't know the new MPs in your party, so it takes quite a lot of time for MPs to get back in to the swing of it once they win a seat again.
That's very interesting. I never thought about that. But I hope she does. I hope she comes back one day. And but I was just having a look back at your provider. I was trying to work out how many podcasts that you actually hold, and it must be quite a lot.
Do you remember that film about Mozart called Amadeus? And
Yeah.
there's a scene in that where he's being tutored, I think, by Salieri. And Salieri says he was judging one of his pieces, and he said, "Too many notes, Mr. Mozart, too many notes." And I think with me, you can say maybe too many podcasts.
Yeah, but I'm right in saying that the one that I came on for the many, that you've done your final episode. You did 500 shows and then you finished,
Yeah.
and So is that the last of that?
That is the end. Do you remember when Tony Blair, in his last appearance as Prime Minister in PMQs, he just finished by saying, "That's it,
That's
the
it.
end." And I mean, I love doing that podcast with Jackie Smith, and we built up a real community of people. But in the end, she went off to be a government minister. I'm delighted for her because that's what she really wanted to do. I always knew
Yeah.
that, but it was not the same doing it with other people. And I think I've had nobody say, "I can't believe you've done this." They all understand the reason because although I did 2 months where I had different people doing it with me, and mo all of them actually were good in their own ways, but I couldn't recreate the same vibe that I had with
Yeah.
Jackie. So I just thought, no, let's end it while we're on a high.
And of course, she's gone on for now Baroness. She's now Baroness Jackie Smith, and she's gone on to back into some mainstream politics. And I have to say, I have to comment on this at the highlight of the last episode. It was the nun joke. You know, I,
I don't know how we
I,
got away
I,
with those.
I, I hadn't heard it and I have laughed and laughed and laughed. It was good, but I'm not gonna repeat it here. But
No, probably better not
no, no,
because
no.
they were in
But
the worst possible taste.
yeah. But I don't know that you started your career, and you must have been very, very young in 1990s, 1980s, like you were a parliamentary researcher
That
for
was actually 1985 to 1987.
uh,
When I left university, I did a degree in German, but I was very politically involved at university, and I got a job with one of the MPs for Norwich because I was at the University of East Anglia, or University of Easy Access, as we used to call it in those days. And so I started working for him in the House of Commons. I went down for a week, I think in when I was still at university, just before Christmas 1984, and just to see if I liked it. I mean, obviously, I would like it. I mean, who wouldn't want to work in Parliament?
of course.
But I had this immense sense of imposter syndrome. I mean, I suspect it was a bit like you at the conference, sort of meeting all of
Oh,
these famous names. Well, I remember one day walking through Central Lobby and coming towards me in the other direction was ex-Prime Minister James Callaghan and ex-President Gerald Ford. And I'm
oh,
thinking, what's a boy from Essex doing in a place like this?
yeah. That's what, that's exactly how I felt at the conference, and I think the funnest bit was on my second day when I came down for breakfast. I was half asleep, and I got in the lift, and Jeremy Hunt was just stand there, and so I can identify with that. Yeah, it's about like a ghost train. Yeah, someone said to me, does it feel like a ghost train ride? I thought, yeah, because round every corner
Yeah.
there was a fright, and that was kind of funny. And so you've had a long career in as a politics, and I read that you stood for Parliament once.
I did in 2005 in North Norfolk, which was a Liberal Democrat seat. And because my mother came from that area, I knew Norfolk well. I was, as I say, at University in Norwich. It was the seat that I wanted to fight. I mean, it turned out to be a massive misjudgment because I was warned by the Liberal Democrat head of campaigns, Chris Renard, now Lord Renard, that the Liberal Democrats would get a 10,000 majority. And he was absolutely right. I thought I knew better, but I didn't.
Yeah.
And that was probably the biggest political misjudgment I've made in my life because I didn't listen to advice. I think if I hadn't gone for that, I would have got what was then referred to as a safe seat. And who knows how different my life would have been. That's not to say I complain about the life I've had because I've really enjoyed the last 20 years. But you do sometimes think, well, a lot of my friends became ministers, several of them got in the cabinet.
Wow.
And you think, well, Could I have done that? Would I have been a good MP? Would I have been able to climb what Disraeli called the greasy pole? Or would I have been the male equivalent of Nadine Dorris and sort of shot my mouth off all the time and been incredibly maverick? I don't know the answer to those questions, and we never will.
That's all. Yeah. So I guess, would you like, would you, I suppose the question is, would you prefer to do that than doing what you do now? I think in some ways, what you do now is a really great position because you still have that political influence, but
Well,
not.
a lot of my friends who are MPs or have been MPs reckon that my job is much better because I have influence without any responsibility.
Mm.
Um, I think if you want to change, the reason most people go into politics is because they want to change things. And the only way to change things is to change the law. And you have to be an MP to do that. Now, I can influence at the margins. If I want to say something to a cabinet minister, I can pick up the phone and they will probably take my call. So that you have a degree of influence just by being able to do that. But I have no power to do anything. I mean, for example, I don't know if you're familiar with the loan charge, which has affected tens of thousands of people across the country. It's effectively the HMRC are trying to claim back tax for 20 years from private contractors. It's totally iniquitous, and played quite a leading part in the campaign to get the government to reverse it. Now, had I been an MP or a minister, I could have actually done something about it rather than trying to persuade people to do something about it. Now, Rachel Reeves has announced an independent inquiry, which I'm very pleased about. But that's a good example of where you can influence at the margins, but you can't actually do anything.
Now, would you imagine that your influence has struggled up and up over the years? Because I was listening to some commentator about Donald Trump, and we'll come on to that in a wee minute. But he's saying that the reason they've done so well is they've got it to meet voters exactly where they are. And no, they are exactly what you're operating now on social media, on podcasts, on so I think yeah, I think your influence and your sort of presence, must say.
Well, do you know what? The thing that I get most satisfaction from in this job is, I mean, I had an email this morning from somebody who said that I think their 15-year-old, I don't know whether it was a daughter or son, phoned into my program a few months ago. And since then, they've got really interested in politics because of my show.
Right.
And I can't get a bigger compliment than that. And I do
Yeah,
get a lot of these from people saying, well, thank you for doing a show that relates to younger people, which at the ripe old age of 62, I mean, I do take as a compliment. And I try to make it accessible. I am a political geek. But I don't. I try not to be too geeky in on the radio show because you've got people listening from all sorts of different backgrounds,
yeah.
and I have to recognise that I am the exception. Most people do not live and breathe politics. They get on with their lives, they get on with their jobs, they have their families, and
Um,
they might think about politics in any great detail at an election time. But most of the time, yes, they might watch the news at 10, 3 nights a week. But that's apart from switching on the radio, that's probably the only contact they have with the whole news agenda. Whereas I'm consumed by it. It's sort of, I mean, I'm doing this podcast with you. What are we talking about? Politics. After I do a podcast with you, I'm doing one with one of the contributors to my Kings and Queens book about Elizabeth I. That's not totally political, but it's history, which is
yeah.
politics and history are the two
Oh,
things that I'm most interested in. Then I go into work this afternoon. I'm recording a podcast, my interview podcast, All Talk, with Robert Hardman, the royal commentator.
wow.
Um, and then I do my 3 hour show, and that's a sort of almost a typical day for me.
Wow.
And I think, I mean, people say, "Do you enjoy your job?" Well, I don't regard it as a job. I
Yeah.
I I
That must be
I've
great.
only
Yeah.
ever had one job that I haven't enjoyed, and all the other jobs I've had, I haven't really regarded them as jobs. And I think anybody that's in that position is incredibly lucky.
I think that must be one of the best positions to be at, you know.
Yeah.
And I've heard a lot of people say, you know, if you, if you, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life, and it sounds like it sounds like that. So that's kind of where you're at, and in some ways where I would like to be because, you know, a year ago I was spending hours listening to political podcasts and commentary, and I just thought, you know, I want a bit of that for myself, you know, because I love politics, and I
Yeah.
thought the only way that I'm gonna get that for myself is to try and create it, and uh,
Well, and
that's and that's what I've
you're a
done.
brilliant example of somebody who's decided what they want to do and you've just gone for it.
Yeah.
And I think that there are so many people who think that they can never do it or they can never get it's a sort of closed shop that you can't get into this without having huge amounts of contacts. And I mean, I don't know your background. I don't know what contacts you had, but you've been determined to do it and you've done it. And I mean, that's quite an example to a lot of other people.
Yeah, you know, I had zero contacts when I started, but I just emailed loads and loads and loads of MPs, MSPs, and said, this is what I would like to do. And eventually it was Chloe Smith that she was the first person to say, yeah, I'll do that. And went from there. I suppose not. I would like to get, you know, some more guests and more sort of writers, and that comes hopefully with time and more subscribers and more, you know, I think that I've heard a lot of people say it's a grind nowadays, you know, trying to get your following up. But
Well, and I think that is a challenge now. I think when podcasting first started, it was a bit like well in blogging. I was one of the first people in Britain back in what 2002, 2003 to start a political blog. And if you're the first mover, you've got an advantage because you become a little bit notorious. And so I was getting within a few years, I was getting more readers than the Independent was getting.
yeah,
And blogging then took off. Podcasting was around at the time, but of course, smartphones didn't exist in those days. And I think most people now listen to podcasts on their phones or on their commute. Um, so, and again, Jackie and I were the first to do a sort of disagreeing agreeably podcast. And of course, there's been lots of Johnny Come Latelys, Alistair and Rory with
uh,
theirs. You've got
right.
the Sky one with Beth Rigby. You've got George Osborne and Ed Balls, all of which are really good. But unless you've got a sort of mainstream media company behind you to market it, it is difficult to build up a mass audience. And I completely understand that. And that's partly why I always, if somebody, um, I mean, I've done two or three podcasts this week with people who are students. And of course, I mean, they're not going to have a mass podcast. But I think, well, if people like me only do the ones with huge audiences, I mean, that is very elitist. So it's a bit like I love going to literary festivals and speaking at them, but I tend to like going to the smaller ones rather than those like Hay or Oxford or Cheltenham because they're a bit like factories. Whereas the smaller ones, and it's the same with podcasts, the smaller ones, they're generally really grateful that you spent the time to do it. And you have a much more interesting conversation because you don't get asked the same questions that you do in some of the bigger ones.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting. I never thought about that because a lot of the bigger ones do become very samey, and I think an example of that is you know, I think about 10 years ago I used to love the Edinburgh Book Festival. I used to always be there, and you know, I haven't been to the Edinburgh Book Festival for about 10 years because it becomes like a, Yeah, like a factory. It's like a big marketing thing.
Well, I hope you've been to one of my Edinburgh Fringe shows.
I hate to say it, but
How dare you?
I hope that you more, well, I hope you'll invite me as a guest next time.
Well, there you go.
Uh,
You see, that's an interesting thing because I've done that now for, is it 3 years or 4 years? Four, I think. And what I've learned is that the audiences at the Fringe, they want politicians. They don't particularly. I mean, if I've invited quite a few famous people in the world of the media or acting, and they haven't attracted the same level of audience as politicians, which I was quite surprised by.
I find that
So
good.
I've learned over the years that, and I don't always just invite people because I think they'll get a big audience. Sometimes I will invite people because I just think they're interesting. But you do have to have a little bit of a profile. So David, when you've got your 100,000 subscribers, that's when the invitation will come flying in.
But it could be a while. It could be a while.
Do you live in Edinburgh?
Yeah, actually, I'm about to move house. I've been living in Edinburgh for 20 something years, and I'm about to move out of Edinburgh to East Lothian, to a smaller place. So I'm moving in end of November, but it's not far, and I can go back and forward.
Well, you see, you've got the great opportunity there, which is what if you move house, you can build your own little studio in the house if you've got room. I mean, that's what we're hoping to move house probably in 2026. And my dream is to have a proper radio studio. But of course, in radio now, as you know, everything. I mean, yours is a podcast, but it's all visualized. So you've got, I want to be able to have like an LBC backdrop in the background. So
Yeah.
then I can do my show from home because of course at the moment I can't because everything has to be streamed and filmed for the viral clips and whatever. But that's what I would love to do, but I've got no idea how much it would cost.
Yeah, yeah, I don't know what the cost of trial because you do see people who are pretty good at it and they've got these home studios and I haven't seen my books for about a year because you put notice that I do this in my front room right now.
Yeah.
So it's not ideal, but yeah, I keep imagining uh, doing the podcast with all my shelves of books behind me because every time I see somebody on TV like that, I think, oh, I wonder what books they've got on their shelves. You know,
Well, do you remember during COVID when we all, I mean, I'd never heard of Zoom before COVID. And I thought, well, how shall I where shall I do it? So I did it in my dining room, which has got like wall-to-wall bookcases on three different walls.
lovely.
And a lot of people did say, because I think there was one where I had a book about Goebbels behind me, which attracted a lot of comment. Um, and then people said, "Oh, I'd really love to see more of your book collection." So I then did a series of about 20 short videos, just filming each shelf and then talking about my favorite books on those shelves. And it became really, really popular.
I think that's a great idea for some sort of series, yeah, some sort of community or show where people show off their book collections because I think it's fascinating what
Mm.
people have got in there. But and obviously you work in publishing, so do you have your own publishing agency?
Well, I don't work in publishing anymore. I actually left the world of publishing 6 years ago in 2018. Um, I ran a publishing company called Bite Back, which I started in 2009. And it was essentially, we concentrated predominantly on current affairs and politics, but we did a few sport books, a few entertainment books. Um, and I really enjoyed doing it. I think I published around 600 books altogether. And I mean, we were never a big publisher, but we punched above our weight in the level of author that we could attract because we could publish quite quickly, whereas most publishers nowadays are very, very slow, which is odd when you think about all the technological advances. Um, So the reason I quit in 2018 was because I was just finding it all a bit too much with I was doing the LBC job, which is effectively a full-time job. I then got a TV show on CNN called CNN Talk, and there were sort of three of us on that, and we did that three days a week. And something had to give. And I normally have a sort of 5 year attention span, and I've been doing the publishing for 10 years. So I just thought, I think it's time. And I'd had a bit of a disagreement about the future direction of the company with Michael Ashcroft, who owns it, still does, in that I thought the only way to expand it and for him to get his investment money back was to effectively merge with a bigger publisher or be bought by a bigger publisher. And I had sort of started that process, but he decided that he wanted to keep ownership. And I just thought, well, that's not really tenable. So it all sort of happened, this all happened at the same time as the CNN thing. So I just thought it was the right time to go. I thought I would really miss it, but I haven't in many ways. I suppose I still miss the thrill of signing up a new book, which you hope is going to
Yeah,
be the next bestseller.
that's a bit.
So I do miss that. But it's always a business that whether you're in a big company or a small company, it is always a bit hand to mouth, and the cash flow is always dependent on the next big book. And we were always dependent on if we got three books which you could describe as bestsellers each year, they sort of almost subsidized a lot of the other ones
Right,
which were
yeah,
never going to be
yeah, yeah.
bestsellers. But I gave a huge amount of opportunities to young authors, and I always got a real kick out of doing that. And even though it's 6 years ago now, people still think that I run it. So I still get book proposals coming in, and I'd still pass them on to buy it back. So I didn't leave, I didn't fall out with anybody. So we still have a good relationship, but I'm not hands-on anymore. But obviously, since then, I've started editing and writing more books.
Good.
I have a literary agent. I mean, how grand is that? So they do all the negotiations with the publishers, and some books I publish through Bite Back. Some I do with Hodder and Stoughton. I've done one with HarperCollins, one with Atlantic. Um, so I'm still involved in the publishing process, even though I don't actually
Yeah.
run the company anymore.
Good, I must be, I must get meeting authors and reading their books and stuff. And of course, there's a lot of people self-publishing now, and which includes myself. I came to Birmingham for these couple of days. I completely forgot to mention to anybody that I'd written a book that we were buying. And so I self-published a book, uh, but it's about me, myself, and I. So I think I think the difficulty is that the people with an interest in my story is quite limited. So
Well, you see,
I haven't sold 100,000 copies yet, but that'd be very nice if I did.
well, I think self-publishing has become respectable because if you had done that 20 years ago, people would have rather looked down their noses at it because it was just, well, it was referred to as vanity publishing, and that in a sense that's what it was. Whereas nowadays, self-publishing is not looked upon like that. And I mean, like you, I've thought, should I write an autobiography? And I thought, well, I don't think it would be a commercial thing. I don't think enough people would buy it. So I've thought about self-publishing it. I mean, I probably will go through the process of sort of seeing if a publisher's interested. But if they're not, I wouldn't be embarrassed to publish it myself because it's easy to do now. You can either do it through Amazon or Lulu or various platforms, and it's not difficult to do. And it doesn't have to cost an arm and a leg, which again, it would have done 10 or 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's relatively simple to do, and I really should keep pushing it. But as you know, sometimes I forget that I've done it because I met somebody in the street that I hadn't seen for a while, And she said to me, how's the book going? And for a minute or two, I thought, what book? And, uh,
Mm.
and so, yeah, I need to remind that I did that, you know. And just, just before you go changing the subject, talk about vanity made me think of Donald. And so what do you make of the big story of the week? The return by Donald Trump.
Well, uh, I mean, I wouldn't have voted for him, I have to say. I think part of the problem we have in this country is that people in the Westminster media and the general political commentariat, they make no effort to understand why people vote for Donald Trump. And I must admit, it flummoxes me sometimes because I watched him in that debate with Kamala Harris whenever it was 2 months ago. And at the end of it, and I always try to watch these things through the eyes of a floating voter or swing
Yeah.
voter, because there's no point in, I mean, if you're a Trump supporter, you just think Trump is brilliant no matter what he says, what he does. And if you don't, you don't. But look at it through the eyes of a floating voter. And I thought, well, I don't understand how anybody could vote for him after that.
No.
But then you look at social media and you think, well, have I called this wrong? Because there were plenty of people saying that he put in a brilliant performance. And I think when you look at the demographics of the people that did vote for him, I mean, his share of the female vote went up. Now, again, I mean, it's inconceivable to me that that could happen, but it did. You look at even after all of the Puerto Rico thing, which I mean, actually, he didn't say, but to all intents and purposes, people think he did. His Latino vote went up by 15%, I think. Black young men drifted towards Donald Trump. And yet we sit here 3,000 miles away and we can't compute that. And we don't make any effort to understand it. I think that's the problem. And I did an hour on my show last night on this, saying, well, why do you think Donald Trump won? And I mean, we've got lots and lots of different answers. I mean, part of the answer was because Kamala Harris was a very bad candidate
It
in
was
many
hopeless.
ways. And I think you have to blame Joe Biden to an extent,
Yeah.
because had he stood back in January and allowed a proper primary process to go forward, she would not have been the candidate, I don't think. And I think she has put back the cause of women standing for president by a long way. And I don't think I will see now a female president. And if there is one, it'll be a Republican one, because often,
Yeah.
again, counterintuitively, it's right-wing parties that often break the mold. So you look at, I mean, the Tories have now had four female leaders, Labour have had none.
Absolutely.
You look at the ethnic minority representation in Conservative cabinets, far higher
Much
than
higher.
is in Labour. So I can quite see a situation where the Republicans could pick a female candidate and she could win in a way that maybe the Democrats never will. I don't know. It's still, I've followed American politics very closely ever since the 1980s, and some of it just still baffles me. I mean, we like to think that, I mean, we all speak the same language, but some of the attitudes that Americans have, we find we don't understand gun ownership. We don't understand why abortion is still one of the main political issues in any election campaign. We don't understand the involvement of religion in politics because we don't really have it now. We may have it in the future. So, some who was it who said? Two great nations divided by a common language, and it's actually divided by thought processes as well.
But yeah, I found it hard to get my head around how how Trump not only won the election, but he won with a bigger
Yeah.
majority than he did in 2016 after all that happened, the impeachment, the losses, and the racism, and I liked what you said. I saw a clip of what you said last night, that there's people here that say, "Oh, people that vote for Trump are just stupid,"
Yeah.
and say, "Well, you can't say that.
Well, people
You
do say
can't
it. I
say
mean,
that."
my colleague James O'Brien, who I'm not going to slag off, but he's kind of made his career over the last few years on Brexit and effectively calling Brexiteers stupid and racist. Well, it's a point of view. I don't agree with it. But of course, this is exactly the same attitude that people with his mindset have about Trump, in that, well, you
Yeah,
must be stupid or racist to have voted for Donald Trump. Now, I'm sure that there were stupid people who voted for Donald Trump.
of
I'm
course.
sure there were stupid people that voted for Keir Starmer. But you can't define a whole country like that. And I think we've got to actually make much more of an effort to understand people who vote in a different way from ourselves.
Mm,
And it's not always easy to do.
no. And I was cross this morning because I read a story that Patrick Harvey, the leader of the Greens in Scotland, has written a letter saying that we should exclude Donald from Scotland and not let him
Well,
in.
it's pathetic.
And it is absolutely pathetic.
I mean, first of all, Donald Trump has, is it two or three golf courses in Scotland, presumably therefore employing more than 100 people.
Hundreds of
I
people,
mean, the,
huge
the
employer.
the thought process, and I mean,
It's
look,
a,
he we have to respect the office of the president. We might not respect Donald Trump as an individual. We might all have our issues with him.
yeah.
But I mean, Ed Davey, the same in Parliament yesterday, was sort of saying, "Oh, we shouldn't invite him into Parliament." I'm sorry, you don't gratuitously offend the leader of the richest nation in the world, who, I mean, if he's going to put 20% tariffs on,
Yeah.
oh, and by the way, let's remember Donald Trump is half Scottish. So, I mean, again,
His,
that's
his,
Patrick Harvey
his,
might like to think about that.
and his mum was raised
Yeah,
on Lewis.
yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
yeah. And
And
and not just and it's not being put there by some crook. I mean, he's democratically
yeah,
elected,
well, it's
and
just
we
political
have what was
grandstanding, which makes people
whatever
look stupid.
it is, but it's not difficult for some of the MSPs and stuff. It's not great, but um, before we go, what do you think will be some of the big things that might change, or the biggest ramifications of Donald's presidency
Well,
in Ukraine, in the Middle East, and in Taiwan? I was thinking about Taiwan yesterday, and obviously, it raises eyebrows about that.
well, I think it depends on how far he goes in delivering what he said on the campaign trail, because if he does try and broker some sort of peace deal in Ukraine, it's not going to be to the advantage of the Ukrainians.
No.
I think the biggest thing that he might do, if he delivers on his promise to impose 20% tariffs on everything that comes into America, that would have major ramifications, both within America and outside it, because I think 20% of our trade in the UK is with the United States. Well, the effect on our economy of throwing 20% tariffs on would be catastrophic. Now, he might, I suppose, say, well, yeah, I'm going to put 20% on all EU goods, but because I love the Brits,
Yeah.
we won't do it to them. I mean, I doubt whether that'll happen. But there's all sorts of things that he might do for good or for evil that will affect countries outside the United States. I mean, what is his attitude going to be towards Israel and Gaza and Lebanon? I mean, I'm sure Netanyahu is very pleased that he won't have to deal with Biden anymore. Um, but I mean, if we think back to his first term, Trump's policy towards the Middle East was actually rather successful with the Abraham
Well,
Accords. I mean, even moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem did not cause the ructions that people were predicting. So I mean, Donald Trump's unpredictability, bizarrely in some ways, can be a strength.
Well,
You like to think that world leaders don't act unpredictably, but I actually think his foreign policy in his first term was probably the best bit of his record in some ways. I thought it was a good thing that he tried to reach out to Kim Jong-un. There's no harm in talking to these people. Now,
yeah.
it didn't, nothing came of it in the end.
No,
Um, but I think the most consequential thing will be how his relationship with Putin develops. Is it going to be as sort of matey as it was the last time? I'm not wholly convinced that will be the case.
no. And it's quite interesting to see what happens. Anyway, they showed the footage on TV of um, President Trump and Kim Jong Il, in North Korea. I've kind of forgotten that piece of film and how amazing it was,
Well, I
And
remember,
any, there's no other world leader
yeah.
than that,
Well, when they met in Vietnam, I was doing the CNN show at the time, and we were covering it live, and it really was quite a moment. I mean, as I say, in the end, it didn't really make any difference, but these things don't always happen immediately, and it'll be very interesting to see whether he tries something similar, because it still calls him Rocket Man. I think there's still some sort of bizarre sort of slightly perverse affection
Yeah.
for Kim Jong-un from Donald Trump. So that'll be interesting to watch.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be exciting times ahead, whatever happens. But Ian, listen, it's been a real pleasure talking to you, and
Well, thank you for inviting me,
thank you so much for doing this.
and good luck with the podcast. Good luck to getting 100,000 subscriptions,
Yeah, I would like more subscriptions and more
and
guests.
come and see me at the Fringe next year. I think I'm going to do it. I've got a meeting with the promoters next week, so I've already got a list of guests that I want to try and get.
And and if you bump into James O'Brien in the corridor, I've invited James O'Brien. I've emailed him several times to ask him if you do it.
I'll give him
I
a
would,
kicking for you.
yeah, I would love to talk to him about his book. I did enjoy his book.
Okay. No,
So
well, look,
yeah,
I will
if you
prob
see him in the
I may
corridor,
well see him this afternoon, so I'll
uh,
pass that on.
there you go.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Cheers, David. Good to see you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.